Which came first, the chicken or the egg? A question we are all familiar with that plays a big role in the Remedyverse. In the context of this series, the more appropriate question would be, which came first, the inspiration or the art? Unlike the original version of this question that was rhetorical, I believe this one has an official answer. Over the course of the franchise, Alan has been shown to have influence over events. Not only the events in Bright Falls or the AWE expansion, but even before that. Working on Night Springs, he is shown to have written scripts related to the Hand Threshold and the Hiss. Another pre-existing episode he worked on was adapted into the events of American Nightmare. These facts have led many to believe that Alan Wake is the originator of all of these events, that without him, none of it would have happened. However, based upon what we learned in Alan Wake 2, this seems to be an incomplete conclusion. The evidence for this comes down to one little note in Alan's writing room. After the musical, this note appears on the plot board. As a child, I saw nightmares of dark shadows. Was that because I was trapped in the dark place now? Dreams as visions through time.
You are a worm through time.
The implication here is that dreams and the dark place share an intrinsic link. That as a child, Alan's nightmares were influenced by this threshold. They were not simply shades summoned by the imagination of a child, but a glimpse of things to come. Time functions differently in the dark place. As a place where all stories, past, present, and future, can exist, anyone with a connection to it will have an ability indistinguishable from precognition. For more information on this, please see my prior video entitled Time, Chaos, in the Dark Place. As mentioned on the plot board, the nightmares he experienced as a kid leaked out from the dark place. Being a receptor of these visions, he perceived them as horrors of his sleeping life rather than echoes of what is to come. These echoes are a gameplay element, witnessing these sources of inspiration which later get added into the current story. Some of these echoes come from the past, some from the future. The chronology of events has no meaning when the dark place is involved. Those blessed with the gift of foresight do not necessarily know the nature of their visions. Some can be fully aware that they see the future, but for some like Alan, he treated them like simple nightmares. Inspiration that stimulated his imagination at such a young age. It got him interested in writing in the first place. The stories he would publish would therefore be inspired not from his own imagination, but from real-life events that have either already occurred or will occur in the future. Inspiration itself has a wide range of definitions. A sudden, brilliant, or creative idea, being mentally stimulated to feel something, drawing in of breath, divine influence coming from an unknown or divine source. This last one is the one I want to focus on, but it is also a good idea to create our own contextual definition as well. As it applies to the Remedy setting, inspiration is real events that echo through the dark place. Those with a connection can pick up on this inspiration, believing it to come from their own creative mind. By taking this definition, the rest of the events surrounding Alan and his writings make far more sense. Let's take a look at what I consider the biggest piece of evidence people normally point to support the Alan created everyone perspective. In the AWE expansion, Jesse uncovers a screenplay entitled Over a Threshold Darkly. It is an episode of Night Springs written by Alan a while back. It directly echoes the events surrounding the Hiss invasion, a secret government body called the Federal Bureau of Night Springs, going into another universe and retrieving an entity, the director being infected and eventually shooting himself to end its influence. As a result of this screenplay, there is a theory running around that Alan created the FBC, created Darling and Trench and Jesse and the Hiss itself. This belief fails to reconcile the differences between what happened in Night Springs and what happened in reality. Let's take a look at the differences. Federal Bureau of Control versus the Federal Bureau of Night Springs. The scientist and the director were antagonistic before entering the threshold, where Trench and Darling only became this way after returning to the oldest house. The control panel filled with a dangerous red color versus the Hiss itself creating a dangerous red hue. In Night Springs, there is one horrific entity, where in reality, Hedron is what is brought back while the Hiss hitchhikes in. The director shoots himself while traveling through the portal versus Trench doing it long after returning into his office. Use of the word portal instead of threshold. While these little changes seem like nitpicks, it is important considering what we just discussed about inspiration through the dark place. Slight changes in the story are to be expected with retelling. Remember the telephone game? Same thing here. It was not that Alan wrote the story and then it was manifested into reality. The events around the FBC, the hand threshold, and the hiss coming through the slide projector happened in reality first, acting as a source of inspiration that echoed through the dark place. Alan had a dream of these events and transcribed what he remembered into the screenplay. Upon waking, dreams tend to diffuse back into the ether where they came. Memory of what happened begins to fade with every passing minute. Therefore, it makes perfect sense that the source of inspiration and the art created from it would not be a one-to-one parallel. There would be creative liberty on behalf of the artist, the dream half remembered by the time the artist sat down to imitate the thing that inspired them. Changes would be made for the purpose of drama. We see this in real-life adaptations. Films being made from books are never a one-to-one reflection of the source material. Even reboots of an existing film will take inspiration from the original and go its own way with the retelling. If Alan was the origin of this narrative, it would be an exact copy, not, for lack of a better phrase, fan fiction of real-life events. This brings us to the biggest example of this. That is the case of Alex Casey. Leading up to the release of Alan Wake 2, myself and most of the community presumed that Alan's writings manifested his character into reality, that his books were the origin point for the character, who then walked off page. However, now we know that is not the case. Alex Casey was a real person before Alan began to write about him. His life was the inspiration. His life echoed through the dark place. Unknowingly, young Alan had dreams about this random FBI agent and his life. They inspired his stories of the hard-boiled NYPD detective. Thinking of it this way gives a much more concise explanation for many things in the Remedy universe. For example, the links between Max Payne, Alex Casey, and one more character that some may not know, Dick Justice. All three are derivative of one another. The reason for this can be simply summed up if we accept two premises. 1. The inspiration comes before the art. And 2. Alan is not the only person with the ability to get inspiration from the dark place. If dreams are the medium in which one has communion with this threshold, the series has shown several people with this power. Clay Stewart had recurring shared dreams with Alan. Samantha Wells was given visions in her dreams of both Alan and Thomas Zane. Richard Boker wrote a letter about his recurring dreams of Cauldron Lake and Taken. This letter was recovered by the Dead Letters Archive. Through use of their moonshine, the Anderson brothers received visions that helped inspire the lyrics of their songs. Even Agent Nightingale was influenced by his dreams, albeit he came to a false conclusion of what they meant. There may be one more, but that will be subject of a future video. If all these people have been shown to have these sorts of dreams, it is fair to assume others do as well. And if so, how many others out there became inspired to create a work of art based upon the same inspiration? Alan was inspired by the real-life Casey to create the fictional Casey. Someone else, possibly a game designer, was inspired by the same person and created Max Payne. Another would have been inspired and made the Dick Justice TV series. But all of it came from one common source: the central points of the Venn diagram. When recalling an event, it is common for every witness to tell a slightly different story about what was seen. The same and not the same. Constants and variables. With all this in mind, I feel it is clear that the story is trying to tell us that the inspiration exists before the art. Alan draws inspiration from many sources, though, not only by means of the Dark Place, but by means of things he himself has read. In the first game, he mentions that when he was just getting started in writing, Stephen King was a source of inspiration for him. Many themes found within the games come right from his work. Same can be said with other pieces of fiction, such as the Cthulhu mythos from H.P. Lovecraft. A magic lake and a dark threshold is not required for inspiration. We see it everywhere we go, in the people we meet, the films we see and the books we read, memories of the past and musings of the future. Our stories are all inspired by something we experienced in our lives. Much of the weirdness in this series comes down to finding out what the original source of inspiration is, and what pieces of art were inspired by it. Alex Casey was real, and many stories were inspired by him. But there is also the case of Tom the Poet. Much of his work is said to be a companion piece to Alan's. But what is the original version? Which is the true inspiration, and which was simply inspired by the other? Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed, please drop a like and subscribe to receive updates on future uploads. If you would like to help support the channel, a Patreon has been set up and the link is in the description below. Have a great day and peace be with you all.